Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily podcast, where today we're going to be diving into a topic that is redefining the landscape of software development. That's right, I'm talking about AI-powered coding. And as businesses look to accelerate innovation, the role of AI in the developer's toolkit is becoming increasingly significant. But the big question is, how do we go beyond just integrating the tech to truly transforming how development teams operate? Well, to explore this complex topic, I'm thrilled to have Chris Reddington, Senior Product Manager of Strategy for Developer Relations at GitHub, joining me today. And Chris has extensive experience working with everyone from startup founders to enterprise leaders and helping them all unlock their engineering potential through AI. So today, we're not just going to discuss the technological shift, but also something I don't think we talk about enough, the cultural changes that are crucial for businesses to fully embrace AI in coding. Reaching listeners in 165 countries every day is testament to the unwavering support of you, my listeners, and our sponsors, without whom this podcast just simply wouldn't be possible. And it also gives me a chance to talk about the fact that legacy DRM failed to securely enable external collaboration, especially on sensitive files, and how every organisation faces this risk-trust contradiction where they can share content with untrusted third parties, yet expected to protect that data. So it's time for something more modern, a DRM solution that solves that dilemma without compromising security or productivity. And you can do all that with a company called Kiteworks that will enable you to say goodbye to deployment headaches, file transfer risk, collaboration barriers, and productivity constraints, so you can experience a more modern way to collaborate on sensitive content without sacrificing control or security. Please visit kiteworks.com to get started today. That's kiteworks.com to get started today. Now is the moment you've really been waiting for. It's time to get today's guest on. So buckle up and hold on tight as I beam your ears all the way to Reading here in the UK, where you can sit down with myself and Chris and join the conversation with us. So a massive warm welcome to the show, Chris. Can you tell everyone listening a little about who you are and what you do?
Absolutely. So I'm Chris Reddington. I'm a senior product manager over on the developer relations team at GitHub. So day to day, I have the awesome job of working with different communities who kind of use GitHub for their day-to-day work. So that could be, for example, engineering teams at enterprise organizations. It could be open source communities, and really just understanding how they're using GitHub today. And what we do is we take that feedback and make the experience better on GitHub, then working with our internal product teams. So yeah, it's a great fun and diverse job that I get to have here.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you join me today. And there's so many things I want to talk about. I mean, you mentioned the passionate GitHub communities out there, and there's also so much hype around AI at the moment, and it seems to have completely divided some of those communities. So I'm curious, from all the conversations you're having, everything you've seen and heard, how has AI-powered software development shifted that traditional approach to coding, and what are the most significant changes that you're observing in this transition? Because I suspect you're hearing both good and bad, but what are you hearing?
Yeah, great question. So I guess the place where we should probably start with that is thinking about fundamentally what it is to be a developer. And I think we need to remember that developers are really these creative beings, right? They're there to solve problems. They want to go and solve the world's problems. So I think when I think about my time building software and developing, I think one of those frustrating things that often comes up is the toil of what we have to deal with day to day. And that could be, for example, writing, a certain function definition or writing some kind of API call. And some of these lines of code look suspiciously similar, but you have to kind of keep building and building upon these lines of code. And I think what that means is there's an opportunity for us to kind of improve that developer experience. So what it means is, if we can just improve that kind of drudgery there, if we can improve the amount of toil there's in there, then maybe we can enable these developers to unleash that creativity, to get some time back so then they can really focus on the problem solving rather than those individual lines of code, if that makes sense. And I think to give one example here. I think ASOS have recently been talking about some of their experiences. They've had a trial for GitHub Copilot. They took, I think, 90 engineers, and 93% of their group said they preferred working with Copilot, and 91% said they found it easier to solve those repetitive tasks that I was just talking about there as well. And I think that's the beauty of these kind of tools, is that it then unlocks this opportunity to start focusing on those other things on the backlog that maybe we couldn't get to. So it's a great opportunity here.
Yeah, such a great point. And everywhere we look, we keep reading about how AI is this co-pilot, a tool that can augment our skills and capabilities and ultimately help developers work quicker, more efficient, smarter, not harder. But in your experience, what are the biggest challenges that organizations face when they first start integrating AI into their software development processes, and how can they overcome some of these obstacles?
Yeah, great question. I think we're at a stage with AI where businesses have largely accepted that AI is accelerating their software development process. So we're kind of over that initial wave of this technology is here, what does it mean? And we're seeing that acceptance. I think the challenge for organizations now really is addressing how best to adopt AI and integrate it into their existing processes. So I think the key thing is, like any technology, AI is only going to deliver on its potential, on the opportunity that it can deliver, when the organization clearly understands how to use it, how to bring it in, to those processes, and how it drives innovation for them, and really maps back to that kind of business strategy that they've got. So I think the other thing there then is that these are tools, right? These are tools just like any other tools that we might roll out across our organization, across our teams. And so we need to think about adoption just like any other tool as well. And I think the difference here with AI typically is when you look at some of these tools like, ChatGPT, like Copilot, etc., the way we interact with them is using natural language. And it makes them inherently easy to use. That barrier of entry is fairly low because I'm just speaking my natural language or chatting my natural language. But I think the important piece is that users know the tips and tricks, how to get the best value out of them. So as an example, if I'm working with, say, GitHub Copilot, and I don't know, something I was doing on the weekend, actually, I was working on my personal site, trying to improve its accessibility, trying to improve some kind of user interface pieces there. And there were certain errors that I was getting. So rather than me just generically asking, help me fix the UI or help me, embrace this kind of accessibility standards, I was very specific about these are the standards that I want to adopt. These are the challenges that I'm seeing on this page. Can you help me solve these? So I think really the idea there is making sure we know what those tips and tricks are to get the best out of these tools, just like any other tool. And I think then just to follow on with that from a wider organization perspective, something that I'm seeing as a bit of a trend and a theme as well at the minute is when you think about adopting tools across the organization, and the enablement is one part of it, what we were just talking about there, knowing those tips and tricks and those skills. But I think building a community around adoption is also a really, really important part of the journey as well. So bringing together those communities so they can kind of share those surprise and delight moments where, wow, this AI tool did this thing for me. It solved my problem and I was not expecting it to happen in one go. And those moments where maybe it didn't quite come together as expected, but they iterated on the idea and eventually got to where they needed to get to and sharing those learnings. So I think those would be my couple of points there really is those tips and tricks, knowing how to get the best out of the tools because it is just a tool like any other. And then making sure that we bring that community along for the journey as well and setting up those kind of shared experiences and those shared learning moments there as well.
And when you were talking about adoption there, I think very often we get distracted or even obsessed by the technology itself or the solution when many of the big changes that are required are more about the culture within an organization. Yeah. So do you see this with AI and what kind of culture shift is required for businesses to successfully adopt AI in coding?
Yeah.
And what role does top-down support play in that transformation? Like I said a few moments ago about bringing the entire community along for the ride, along for that transformation.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, embracing AI really is a cultural shift more than it is a technology shift in some ways. When you think about the definition of disruptive technology, I think we're really in that moment with AI at the moment. And it really requires us to kind of shift our mindset of just, simply adopting and using the tool, but thinking about how this just changes, the way that we think about how we work with some of these tools. So really, I think part of the puzzle piece there is having that top-down support and that kind of top-down vision of how AI is going to transform how we develop software within our organization. What is the opportunity for us? And that could be a couple of ways. That could be within our internal development process using tools like, we make over here at GitHub, or it could be how you also adopt AI within your own applications as well and use that to enhance what you serve to your own end users as well. So I think it comes down to having that vision and that kind of strategy in terms of what it means fundamentally in your domain, in your area. But then it also comes down to having that openness and acceptance to change, having that willingness to experiment as well, because, this is a tool. We need to figure out how we thoughtfully integrate it into what we do day to day. We shouldn't really just kind of be using AI for the sake of it, but thoughtfully integrating it into our processes. And I think that's really what I would say is just that vision and that strategy from the top down and allowing that culture of openness and acceptance to change so that there's a willingness to start experimenting with these tools. I think that's then where the magic happens with some of this AI adoption.
And one of the biggest rules or oldest rules from the corporate world is you can only improve what you measure. So how should
Yes.
businesses measure the success of AI-powered software development, if not by the volume of code produced? And any other metrics or indicators that you would suggest?
Great question. So I think this might surprise some viewers some listeners, I should say. I think that, for anyone who's maybe not from the software development background, one of the things you would expect is, well, the more lines of code that I write means good things, right? But actually, if I can solve the same problem in 2 or 5 lines of code compared to 10, 15, 20, then, surely that's a good thing, right? So I think the thing that we really think about over here at GitHub is not the lines of code outputted or the lines of code produced. It's more about the impact on the developer, the impact on that developer experience. So rather than thinking about productivity, what we think about is developer happiness. So, culture is something we were just talking about. So it really fits into that idea of culturally, are these organizations deeply investing in that great developer experience? So again, from my own experience, I mentioned I was making some changes to my website on the weekend. It's helped me bring back the joy into development for me. I'm not someone who retains every kind of property or method call or the different kind of options that I can use within a language, different regular expression patterns and all of these different ways of working. I have to go and look these things up. So I think for me, what it's been able to do is help keep me in that kind of flow state. I think that's really the idea behind this, is it removes many of those mundane tasks that we have as developers from being able to stay in that flow and being able to do our best work. Because, if we're constantly being pulled to go and research a different topic, go and look up a different set of documentation, or go and look how a certain property works or how something works, then it keeps pulling us out of that flow. It keeps pulling us out of the editor or from that task that we're working on. And that kind of randomization and that context switching is hard. So it means that I'm going to be more fulfilled, and it means I'm going to be more motivated because I'm focused more on solving that core problem, delivering value to end users. That's ultimately what DevOps is about. So if I can focus more on that and less of those kind of micro problems that I'm solving along the way, then that's kind of what we're aiming to do, is we're aiming to increase that developer happiness and improve that developer experience. And I think, in fact, some recent research has shown that as many as, within an enterprise setting, developers work with as many as 21 other engineers on a project on average. So when you think about collaboration and when you think about all of these problems that we're trying to solve from a code perspective and, things like security, for example, as well. There is a lot to the software development role, and it keeps getting stretched and stretched. So I think if these tools can help, in terms of that developer fulfillment, in terms of making sure that developer experience is seamless, that is really what it's about for us. So that's kind of where I'd approach that, is rather than productivity as lines of code, thinking about that fulfillment, that flow state, and that idea of developer experience. And AI brings a significant opportunity for us there, I think.
It really does. And I think one of the biggest promises of AI, as you mentioned right at the beginning of our conversation, is replacing those repetitive, mundane tasks so we can focus on more value-add work. So in what ways can AI tools help developers focus on those more meaningful and complex aspects of their work? And how does this impact the overall innovation within a company? Is there anything you're seeing here?
Yeah. I think, again, to your point, removing those mundane tasks, that prevent developers staying in the flow.
Yeah.
I think, as we just mentioned, it helps with that fulfillment, it helps with that motivation side. And I think in my experience, having, as part of the day-to-day, I speak with developers at conferences and events and various calls and whatnot. I think very few get into development to think about how that individual line of code is crafted, to think about how that particular regular expression is solved. They're looking at that kind of macro problem, how they bring value to their users. So if I build, a shopping cart service, how it's the best shopping cart service that I can ship for my users, how I can make that experience just wonderful for my users. So I think if we can then get developers focused on the things they care about, solving those problems, then they're going to be happier, they're going to be more engaged. And what that then means is these AI tools, they save developers time, they can focus on those overarching problems that come with it. So things like, that more architectural kind of thinking and that system design kind of thinking, and the testing to make sure they're building these robust systems, for example, and making sure that they're investing for the overall developer experience. So if they're providing a service where, other teams internally need to rely on that, is there good documentation for those other teams, and just kind of leveling up that overall experience that they provide for their kind of consumers internally as well. So I think it helps just in terms of that overall kind of framing of software development. And I think, maybe that's something we can come back to in a bit, but the idea that software development is more than just writing code. There's obviously the end-to-end development lifecycle, building, testing, deploying, etc., and making sure that our stakeholders are able to go and use our software as they need and kind of contribute to our software as well, potentially internally or externally if we're talking about open source. So I think, there's many different ways, and I'm sure we could go in many different directions here.
Well, we'll give you an opportunity here because, as you just said, it is so much more than just writing code. And I always like to ask my guests if there are any myths that they would like to lay to rest. So what are some of the biggest misconceptions about AI-powered software development that maybe you've encountered when working with executives and engineering leads? And how do we address these misconceptions and lay them to rest once and for all?
Yeah. I think one of the ones that I've seen come up a bit, and I'd say this is, in the minority, but it's not unusual to hear of some of these enterprise leaders who question whether these AI tools should be used by junior developers. So to expand on that, I guess the argument that I hear typically is if these junior developers use tools from the outset of their career, then do they maybe not get some of that critical thinking? Do they not get some of those foundations that are so vital in software engineering? And then there's kind of the other end of the spectrum where, AI is so powerful that actually developers are going to miss out on that education and those coaching moments as well. And I think what I'd say is there's a middle ground to that. I'd say these tools can be used to help accelerating the learning of those junior developers. And I'm not saying, that there shouldn't be a need for those foundational kind of knowledge and that foundational concept. Absolutely, that should still be there. But I think where the beauty is and where the value lies is if you think about a new engineer onboarding into your organization, now they've got this kind of mentor or this colleague that they can go and ask for assistance. They can go and ask to help explain what this code does. They've got that contextual explanation and that assistant to be able to help them in terms of writing that code or understanding that code that maybe the wider team is working on. So I think for me, that is then still a great learning opportunity, because what we'd expect is that code, just like any other code, would go through the same checks and balances that you would expect to go through. So going through a pull request, builds, tests, quality checks, etc. But most importantly, having someone else on the team review that code, and you still have that learning opportunity with, a senior on the team who can kind of coach, guide, and advise, etc. as well as part of that. So I think it's still absolutely a part of that process, I would say. So yeah, I think there's maybe a couple of themes that I've pulled out there as I've answered. One being that junior developer piece, but the other, the importance of making sure we have those quality checks as part of the process as well. AI can make mistakes. It's probabilistic, it's generative, and so it's important to make sure that I, as the developer, am kind of reviewing that code. We called it Copilot for a reason, so I'm still the one who's kind of taking those code changes, accepting them, and making sure that they pass the quality bars that we have internally as well.
And I think in some circles there have been concerns that AI can make us lazy if we keep outsourcing critical thinking and easy tasks. But I think actually there's a real opportunity to enhance all-round skills, especially for developers. So what specific benefits have you seen in terms of their ability to solve challenges more effectively and ultimately enhance skills rather than remove them?
Yeah, sure. I think to call back to a few things we've talked about here already, I think first, developers are creative beings, and I really want to ground us on that idea. We're problem solvers. We love to solve problems. And I personally didn't get into the industry to write or debug a specific line of code. Instead, I want to build things that people love, that people care about, that they're excited to go and use. So I think keeping me in that flow state and having that knowledgeable assistant is key. And I think the other part is what we talked about around coding being one part of what a developer does as well. So, industry numbers vary, but I think some of the numbers that I've seen is that around 25% of a developer's time is related to coding and related to development. And there's a large amount of time outside of that might be collaborating with colleagues, reviewing pull requests, doing that architecting and diagram and docs write-up and all of these other things that aren't necessarily just being in the editor and coding. And I think one thing that, love it or hate it, that is a big part of what we do is security. And I think security is so important. It's always been important, but I think more than ever, you look at the state of the industry and the state of the world with cybersecurity right now, it's clearly still something that developers should be thinking about. And I think the challenge is that not all developers are security experts. That's just, a nature of kind of the industry. And I think this is where it's getting really interesting with AI. So, for example, here at GitHub, something we've just recently announced actually is GitHub Copilot Autofix. So imagine that rather than you having to be that security expert, you've got this thing, Copilot Autofix, which is like having the expertise of your security team at your fingertips while you review code. So you still use the same processes, you still use your pull request, but it's there to kind of help you and potentially propose a fix if it detects an alert, for example, that is something you might want to go and fix. Another example is like something else that we just announced recently, GitHub Models. So imagine that you're trying to experiment with different AI models that you want to use in your application. Again, GitHub Models is like this playground where you can go and experiment and try out which AI model might make sense in your app. Maybe there's another one that might be more appropriate. And I think really overall, this isn't going to be a surprise to anyone, but there's a lot of innovation in the space. And I think the important thing is how we can thoughtfully use AI to help upskill and solve problems rather than just using AI because it's cool or for the sake of using it. So, going back to junior developers, as we mentioned earlier, AI can help those junior developers on board more quickly. It can help teach them, context about the code base, for example, how an organization thinks about code, maybe syntactical patterns, naming conventions, expectations, or guardrails. And then that kind of exploratory and that discovery piece as well of the wider code base. So I think there's just a lot of opportunity across the life cycle. And I think this is something we're really looking at the moment is beyond the editor, what are those opportunities? And most importantly, how do we be really intentional about improving that developer experience? Because that is the core thing for us as we look at how we bring these AI tools as part of GitHub.
There really is so many opportunities. And looking ahead as this continues to evolve, are there any future trends that excite you or you anticipate in AI-powered software development? And the big question, of course, for every business leader listening is how can they better prepare to stay ahead of the curve in this rapidly evolving field?
Oh, absolutely. If I knew the answer, I would be much richer, I think, than I am today. But I can tell you one thing. I don't think the pace is going to slow down anytime soon. We are absolutely in this disruptive moment, in this innovative moment. And I think the pace of that is absolutely incredible. And so I think that's the main thing I would suggest to businesses is that making sure they keep investing in their team's learning and development across the board, whether it's your developers, whether it's whichever teams may need to care about and understand more about AI, making sure that they keep investing in their learning and development. And I think these technologies are going to keep evolving. Like retrieval augmented generation has been a bit of a theme over the last year or couple of years. Agentic workflows, the idea of AI agents is now a bit of a hot topic at the moment. And I'm sure that will keep changing as well as we move forward. So, new models will be introduced, new capabilities will be introduced. And it's important to make sure that teams are on the front foot. They've got the right knowledge, the right skills to be able to take advantage of that, to be able to use that to help with that innovation there as well. And having that opportunity to experiment, like we talked about earlier, and having that kind of cultural environment to be able to experiment, I think is going to be key as part of all of that.
And on a more individual level, I suspect everyone listening will feel that pressure to be in a state of almost continuous learning. So I've got to ask, on a personal level for you, where or how do you self-educate to keep up to speed with this constant pace of change?
Great question. I think that the important thing for me, and this is something I've learned over the last kind of 10, 15 years, I guess, is we all learn in different ways. And that's something we should definitely appreciate that, some people learn really well by digesting written information. Some will learn really well by listening to podcasts, for example. I know for me, for example, the best way I learn is I'm a visual learner. I'm someone who needs to kind of touch and get hands-on with kind of the technology. I need to kind of break things and understand and pick things apart and put it back together. So that's my way of kind of learning. And so quite often I will be doing things like, putting some kind of project together to test that technology and to understand how it works. Others might go and read the docs and that might be, okay for them. So I think recognizing the way that you learn and what that superpower is, I think is going to be key, and being really intentional about that learning and fitting it into your schedule. So I think in this world, I think we've seen this probably since cloud has come around, to be honest, and the pace of change that we've seen with cloud technologies. But learning shouldn't be an afterthought. It's something that helps us continually improve. It helps us contribute to the success of others too, because if I'm able to maybe coach, guide, or give advice or thoughts and bounce ideas to my colleagues, then, I'm learning from them, they're learning from me, and we're helping each other be successful as well. But I do say all of this in the context of I'm studying for an MBA at the moment as well. So balance and trying to find the time to study is definitely a challenge, I recognize. So I acknowledge that one.
Love it. And I think that's a powerful moment to end on. But before I do let you go, we've covered a lot of ground today. So where would you say is the best place for listeners to find you or your team online and just find out more about anything we talked about, including some of the big announcements that you've made recently? Where would you like to point everyone?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the GitHub blog would be the best place to go for that. So there's some great posts on there, specifically tips and tricks for using GitHub Copilot, some broader posts about AI across the tech industry as well. and, more thought leadership pieces there as well to help kind of set the context of things. I think if anyone wants to chat further, I'd always love to connect. I'd love seeing what people are doing on GitHub and some of those innovative things people are working on. So please take a look, connect with me on socials. Happy for that as well. Probably more active on LinkedIn these days, but love hearing about those projects. And I guess the final call as well, of course, is we have GitHub Universe coming later this year. So you mentioned about announcements. Yeah. I suspect there'll be quite a few exciting announcements coming there as well. And that'll be a good opportunity to connect with myself and members of the team as well. So if anyone's attending there, would love to connect there as well.
Well, I'll add links to everything so people can find everything nice and easy. And I do love a good teaser to end on a podcast. So GitHub Universe, we will have to get you on back later in the year and find out more about some of the announcements there. And there's so many big takeaways from our conversation today. From AI-powered software development is not just about integrating tech. It also hinges on change management. And also, the impact of AI-powered software development must not be measured just by the volume of code produced, and also to ease some of the fears out there as well. AI coding will actually enhance developers' all-round skills. I'd love to hear more from developers, what they thought today. But more than anything, just thank you for starting that conversation today, Chris.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Wow, what an insightful conversation there with Chris Reddington from GitHub. I think AI-powered software development isn't just about writing more code, as I just said. It's about fostering a culture that empowers developers to focus on what truly matters, solving complex problems and driving innovation. Again, we don't talk about that side of things enough. So if you're inspired by today's discussion and want to learn more, please make sure you connect with Chris and his team online. And the future of software development is rapidly evolving, and staying ahead means embracing both tools and the mindset that AI brings to the table. So now it's time for me to put the microphone in front of you. Where will your AI journey take you next? Did we miss anything from today's conversation? Would you like to join me on the show? Do you have a question? Whatever it is, I'm here for you. I want you to share your voice, your insights, and join this conversation that we started today. So as always, email me, techblogwriter@outlook.com. You can also get me on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram @Neil C. Hughes. But that's it. Big thank you to Chris for joining the podcast today. Even bigger thank you to each and every one of you for tuning in. You're what makes this show work, and one of the reasons why I record it every day. So hopefully you'll join me again tomorrow. You are officially invited to join me with another guest where we'll explore another topic, but I'm afraid we're out of time. So thank you for listening, everyone, and I will speak with you all again bright and early tomorrow morning.